I'm not sure how everyone else's biological reactions work, but the number one thing I've always associated with deep emotional discomfort is stomach knots. More so than crying, for me at least. I actually tend to associate tears with being moved in a more positive way, but for negative emotions, this twisted, sickly feeling in my gut is the ultimate sign that something is very, very, very wrong. This is incredibly silly and subjective and probably utter nonsense, but most music I found that goes after the feeling of despair feels more like crying music to me than stomach knots music. Maybe because a lot of it is this very lethargic and mellow kind of despair that I rarely vibe with. When I'm looking for emotions in art, especially in music, in general, I'm looking for potency. And I very, very, very rarely find something that fills me with so much discomfort that it reaches stomach knots level. And when I do, they have this really annoying habit of getting less than 100 ratings on RYM. Oh well. Art Far Away is a metalcore band that has only two releases to their name, a masterpiece of an album and an EP that I haven't heard, but I have heard isn't as good. And this has been your Deep Cuts guide to Art Far Away. But that album is absolutely astounding. One of my all-time favorites as of this video. Firstly, it's just an absolute triumph of composition. I think a lot of people, consciously or not, have this kind of false sliding scale in their heads between complexity and visceral enjoyment. That going for one necessitates compromises on the other, and that your brain needs something simple to like immediately hook into in order to have a good time with something. And obviously, there's little grains of truth in this, but Verisimilitude in the Second Estate is a clear exception. Musically, this album is absolutely thrilling and shockingly catchy for what it is, but it's also really compositionally untrivial. The riffs wind and turn in on themselves and morph across sections of a single song. But it's this very complexity that gives it such a visceral quality, rather than compromising it. It's unpredictable enough to take you on a ride, but it makes enough musical sense that you have something to latch onto. It helps that literally every song is distinct. Some songs, like Obfuscation, are just absolutely relentless and escalating intensity, just both musical and emotional, as it overloads on frantic guitar parts and eventually culminates in this hard-on-sleeve, gut-punch vocal performance, one of many on the album. The closing track, Your Back is Gently Breaking, is far more subdued, with some of the more just gut-wrenching, heartfelt riffs and passages, culminating in another heartbreaking vocal delivery. There's a lot of those on this album, actually. One of the most memorable being the climax to White Man's Burden, which has this strange, pitch-dark anthemicness to it. And then there's the manic horror of that delivery halfway through Gentleman's Club, and the vocals on this album in general are just really, really good. Really, every song finds its own beautifully cathartic flavor of just absolute despair. Even if it's the kind of distinctions that are hard to put into words. Like, the main riff on Alice in particular just makes me catch all sorts of feelings, and the spectral outro is just incredible. This album makes me think a lot about my relationship with art that communicates negative emotions. My general, snarky, quippy, but still somewhat truthful response to a lot of despair-filled music is that my life is already sad enough. I go to music to escape from it, so I'm not sure why I'd want to dwell on it. Honestly, I'm still working out exactly why some negative stuff resonates with me and some doesn't, but for Verisimilitude and the Second Estate in particular, something about this album feels emotionally exploratory for me. If I've ever experienced the kind of despair being shown on this album, it's been so infrequently that hearing it put to tape, being able to experience it by proxy, has this sense of unfamiliar thrill to it. Despite being undoubtedly a heartbreaking experience, I get something out of it. Maybe I just don't like negative art that I strongly relate to, but then again, I do get some feelings of solace and even camaraderie from stuff like The Lonesome Crowded West and Leaves Turn Inside You. I'll I'll figure it out eventually, I guess. In the meantime, Art Far Away's Verisimilitude in the Second Estate is just dazzling, to be honest. It's emotionally and musically harmonious and compelling in a totally ideal way, a way I would love to achieve if I ever make music. It's inspiring artistically, it's exciting, and it's absolutely powerful, and it deserves to be hunted out by more people as a treasure. I Okay, this is a new series called Miniike's Treasure Hunting. It's about underrated and underexposed albums, just like shorter videos that I could get out more quickly. I wasn't sure if there should be like a catchphrase in every episode to quickly explain the premise. Like, this is what happens when you don't make a video in like 9